shadows creep. A secret lies where whispers sleep. A pulse in the night, it pulls you in. A never-ending symphony of sin.
There are stories that feel as if they were written in candlelight. Stories stitched together with fear and brought to life by hands trembling in the dark. And today we explore the story of a man whose touch is still felt between every line of one of the world's most famous novels, Frankenstein. Not the monster itself, but the shadowy figure who helped create it. A man whose touch is still felt between every line of Frankenstein. He was a poet haunted by storms, visions, and a fate he seemed unable to escape. Percy Bysshe Shelley. And without him, the creature may never have opened its eyes. Picture the scene. The year is 1816, the year without a summer. A world smothered by ash, cold and endless rain. Thunder cracks over Lake Geneva. The Villa Diodati groans in the wind. Inside, a young Mary Shelley wakes from a nightmare of a man bending over lifeless flesh, of eyes snapping open, of something unspeakable drawing its first breath. She clutches her head and begins to write. But there is someone else in the room, watching, listening, waiting. Percy Shelley steps from the shadows, his presence quiet, intense, electric. He takes Mary's trembling pages and begins to read. And then he begins to change them. Not the idea, not the horror, but the bones of the story, the muscle, the very voice of Victor Frankenstein himself. Percy's handwriting curls and twists between Mary's words like smoke, guiding, correcting, sharpening. The monster was hers, but Percy, he was building the body. Frankenstein did not emerge from comfort, nor from idle imagination. It was born in shadow and shaped by chaos. In the summer of 1816, confined to a storm-lashed villa on the shores of Lake Geneva, Mary awoke from a vision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. From that vision, the idea of Frankenstein was born. Not yet a novel, not yet the Gothic masterpiece the world would come to know, but a story of creation, responsibility, and the consequences of defying natural order. It was a story of ambition and dread, of the human desire to reach beyond limits, and the inevitable suffering that follows. Now in her mind, Mary began to shape the tale of a man who would dare to play God, and of being left to endure the world alone, abandoned by its creator. This nightmare was not merely a fleeting fancy. It became the seed of a novel that would forever intertwine human fear with moral inquiry, imagination with horror, and genius with tragedy. And it was only the beginning.
To suffer woes which hope thinks infinite, to forgive wrongs darker than death or night, to defy power which seems omnipotent.
She later described seeing a pale student kneeling beside the thing he had assembled, horrified as life stirred where death should have remained undisturbed. It was not a dream of triumph, but of dread. And from that moment came Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus. A story not of monsters, but of responsibility abandoned, of creation pursued without restraint. And at the centre of Mary's world stood Percy Bysshe Shelley, a man of brilliance, contradiction, and relentless instability. Rome feels less like a city and more like a mausoleum of ideas. Its architecture looms rather than welcomes, broken columns, fallen empires and churches built atop the bones of the ancient world. This was a landscape that spoke fluently to Percy Shelley. Here, beauty was inseparable from ruin, and permanence was revealed as an illusion. It is the same contradiction that pulses through his poetry, creation entwined with destruction. The lifestyle of Rome moved in quiet contemplation, steeped in art, ritual and mortality. Death was never hidden away. It existed openly in tombs, relics and memorials woven into daily life. For Shelley, this was not morbid, it was honest. Poetry, after all, was his way of grappling with the fleeting nature of existence, and Rome offered constant reminders that even the greatest works of humanity eventually crumble. It is impossible to stand among these ruins without thinking of Frankenstein. Though Mary Shelley gave the monster its voice, Percy's philosophical imprint lingers in the pages. The obsession with forbidden knowledge, the challenge to divine authority, and the tragic consequences of creation unbound by restraint. Mary met Percy in 1814. He was already married, already controversial, already buried beneath mounting debt. His life was one of constant movement, lodgings abandoned, letters unanswered, addresses changed, always one step ahead of creditors and bailiffs. Permanence was something Percy seemed unable or unwilling to sustain. He lived as he wrote, and without moderation. Even when devoted to Mary, Percy pursued other women, convinced that emotional freedom justified emotional damage. Idealism and selfishness coexisted within him. Love expanded outward, leaving fractures behind. Mary followed him into this disorder. Together they endured poverty, exile and repeated bereavement. Children were born and lost. Stability was promised, never delivered. Yet for all his failings, Percy recognised Mary's intellect in a world that rarely did. He had encouraged her writing, challenged her ideas and treated her as an equal, something few men of that era ever offered. But lives lived without anchors often drift towards catastrophe. Now when Mary's story was finished, she faltered. She feared ridicule, dismissal, silence. Who would publish such a grotesque tale from a 19-year-old girl? Percy stepped forward. His name, his reputation, his signature. They became the doorway Mary could not yet walk through alone. He wrote the preface, mysterious, philosophical, powerful, and the publisher agreed to print the novel, but only anonymously. And so when Frankenstein first reached the public, a whisper spread like fog across London. This must be Percy Shelley's work. Critics dissected the book with surgical precision. They admired its darkness, its intelligence, its cruelty, and they said no woman could have written this. In the salons and drawing rooms, they called the monster his, and Percy did not deny it, not yet anyway. But as Frankenstein grew in fame, something else grew inside Percy. A restlessness, a trembling, a sense that he was being pursued, not by a man, but by a shadow. Mary wrote that he had begun seeing figures in mirrors, hearing voices calling from the sea, dreaming of his own death, drowned, broken, washed ashore like wreckage. He spoke of dark omens, of the monster within men, of a destiny that would not let him rest, and his eyes always seemed fixed on something behind him, something only he could see.
The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair.
In July 1822, and off the Italian coast, Percy Shelley drowned when his small boat was overtaken by a sudden storm. He was 29 years old. His body was not recovered for more than a week. When it finally surfaced, it had been claimed by the sea, bloated, decomposed, stripped of recognisable identity. The poet who had written so eloquently of beauty and annihilation had become quite literally unmade. Because of quarantine laws, Percy's remains could not be returned intact. Instead, he was cremated on the beach at Viareggio. A pyre was constructed in the open air, sand beneath, sky above. Friends watched as fire consumed what the sea had spared. Yet something refused to burn.
The soul of Adonis, like a star, beacons from the abode where the eternal are.
As the flames died down, Percy Shelley's heart remained intact, hardened, calcified, impervious to the fire. Some believed it had resisted the flames due to illness. Others saw symbolism where science offered explanation. The heart was retrieved from the ashes, and a man called Leigh Hunt took the heart and preserved it in spirits of wine. At first he refused to hand it over to Mary. He finally relented and the heart was eventually handed over. Mary kept the heart for the rest of her life, wrapped in silk, hidden among the pages of his poetry. A physical relic of a man who could never be contained, now reduced to a single, indestructible organ, carried silently through the years by the woman he left behind. But here, the echoes of Frankenstein grow impossible to ignore. A body dismantled, a creation subjected to fire, something vital refusing destruction, a survivor forced to carry what remains. Because Percy Shelley's death was not merely an ending, it was the final expression of a life lived in defiance of limits. Obsessed with the sea, with oblivion, with forces greater than himself. Percy seemed drawn towards dissolution. His final poetry spoke of impermanence, erasure and surrender. As we move now into Percy Shelley's last days and towards the storm, the pyre and the heart that would not burn, we begin to see how closely his life mirrored the warning Mary had already written into existence. Creation without responsibility, freedom without restraint, and the terrible cost paid by those left behind to gather the ashes.
Drive my dead thoughts over the universe, like withered leaves to quicken a new birth.
Percy Shelley's life was never one of balance. It was marked by turmoil, by uncertainty, by excess. He lived in debt, in defiance and often contradiction, married more than once in all but name, emotionally entangled with several women, perpetually in motion to escape both creditors and consequence. Stability eluded him because perhaps he never truly sought it. And yet for all his disorder, Percy Shelley's voice refused to vanish. He died young, violently and unfinished, his body dismantled by sea and fire, his heart carried silently by the woman he left behind. But what the storm could not erase was influence, what the pyre could not consume was legacy. Because Percy Shelley did not disappear in 1822. He lived on in verse, in reputation, in controversy, but also in a far darker and more unexpected place. He lived on within Frankenstein. Standing here at the edge of what is partially Percy Shelley's grave, after all, we know his ashes are buried just directly in front of us. It's difficult not to feel the weight of unanswered questions. Percy Shelley believed in the power of ideas to outlive the body, in words as a form of defiance against death itself. And yet, even he could not escape the same fate that claimed emperors, poets, and empires alike. Rome teaches us that nothing truly vanishes. Ruins remain, verses endure, and warnings echo across centuries. Frankenstein asks what happens when humanity reaches beyond its limits, while Shelley's life asks something quieter and perhaps more unsettling. What remains when brilliance is extinguished too soon? Perhaps it's not the length of a life that matters, but the shadow it casts. Shelley's body lies here, silent and still, but his ideas continue to move through the world, unfinished, unresolved, and disturbingly alive. And in a city built upon the remains of the past, we are left to wonder, are we creators of something lasting, or merely another layer of ruins waiting to be uncovered?
My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair.
Open the door, the shadows creep. A secret lies where whispers sleep. A pulse in the night, it pulls you in. A never-ending sin.